A veteran charity is hosting a new track series to reduce veteran suicide. The format is track cross, like a time trial or time attack, but with just one car running at a time. Drivers compete individually and as teams. The event is at Summit Point Raceway on October 22nd. Registration is on motorsportreg.com. Search for Top Dog Track Cross.
Welcome into another edition of New Track Record. Caleb Hatch and Justin Kinney with you. Hello, Justin.
Hi, Caleb. How are we doing?
Doing well. And IndyCar down to the final race, and for the 17th straight year, it's the championship going down to that final race. Multiple drivers involved. In fact, technically, 5 can win, but in reality, it's really 3.
Right. We said it right here on this very podcast last week. We would get down to 3, and we predicted the big 3, and here we are. We're not talking big 3 teams. We're talking the big 3 drivers in this championship. Power, Newgarden, Dixon, and Will Power definitely in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. Power with a 20-point lead over Scott Dixon and over Joseph Newgarden as they're tied for second. Then you go back a little further in the standings, and that's where it gets a lot trickier for some of these guys. Marcus Ericsson there, he's back, 39 points? My math
Are
is
you
correct.
Doing the math?
I'm
Are
not
you trying to do the math?
I should not be trying to do the math. It's never recommended.
Yes, 39 points is Marcus Ericsson, 41 to Scott McLaughlin.
So that's your top 5 in the championship. Power, Newgarden, Dixon, Ericsson, McLaughlin. Alex
And
Blow
Jimmy
eliminated.
Johnson lurking 323 points behind.
Coming off a 24th at Portland, the Grand Prix of Portland over the weekend. In fact, we'll kick things off there, Justin.
Yes.
It was a dominating, and I cannot stress that enough, dominating performance by Scott McLaughlin. Over the weekend, he wins the pole. He wins the race. He was never challenged in this one. I mean, this is a guy who's got 3 wins on the season, 3 poles now. He's had a stellar campaign. It's kind of hard to believe that he hasn't factored more into the championship.
It was a dominant performance, definitely, out of Scott McLaughlin. And, there was some intrigue with the one caution that we had, later in the race. But McLaughlin was the class of the field. And if you take out that little stretch between Long Beach and Detroit, that 5-race stretch where he was 6th at Barber, but other than that, 14th or worse at Long Beach, the GP, the 500, and Detroit, we're probably talking about McLaughlin being towards the top and within striking distance, if not above Will Power at this point. So I think next year is that year where we're really going to see Scott McLaughlin be that title challenger, and that was why he was brought over from Australia to the IndyCar Series to compete for championships. So last year, it's all falling into place for Scott McLaughlin and Team Penske, right? Last year was that acclimation year. This year he's winning races. Next year he's going to win races and compete for a championship.
Yeah, we'll start with our 3 things. I'll start right there. I think Scott McLaughlin, with the way he's closed this season, 3rd at the second Iowa race, then 4th at the second Indy GP, 2nd at Nashville, won the pole there, 3rd at Gateway, and then obviously pole and race win at Portland last weekend. To me, he goes into next year as the championship favorite. Look, he got that first win out of the way early, also got the pole at St. Pete. Scott McLaughlin was one of a short list of drivers we expected to get their first IndyCar win this season. Obviously, another one of those is Romain Grosjean. That did not work out as far as drivers getting their first win in the series. And, we thought maybe Christian Lundgaard could be that guy. He's come close, a second, couple of races ago at the Indy GP. But, Grosjean and McLaughlin were those 2 guys we thought, okay, they'll get wins this season. It has not worked out for Grosjean as he's mired back 13th in the standings, has really struggled finishing outside the top 15 the last 4 races. But Scott McLaughlin has been as advertised and more this year.
He absolutely has. And, partly I think, and we'll get to this probably on a later podcast when we do our season review, but, how much of Grosjean's struggles have been him. I think that's some to do with it, but also the team disappointment. Only two wins, one by Herta, one by Rossi this year. Those aren't the expectations for Andretti. But, jumping back to Scott McLaughlin, just a phenomenal run since that second Iowa race, third, fourth, second, third, first. And he will look, to maybe has a shot at the top three to finish the season. I don't expect a championship, but, he's done tremendously well in year two.
What's your first takeaway?
What's my first takeaway? Let's talk about, the who's who at the front of this. We talked about it last week about what's Power, Newgarden, and Dixon going to do to set themselves up for Laguna Seca. Will Power, Scott Dixon took care of business second and third, respectively. And how about Scott Dixon starts 16th, goes to third, same old Scott Dixon, right? Non-factor throughout most of the race, and then finishes on the podium. And coinciding with that, Joseph Newgarden was his tire strategy late in that race. Could that have potentially cost him the championship at this point?
Yeah, I mean, he was put behind the 8 ball with that tire strategy move late in the race. Wrong call on the tire selection to end it, as Reds were clearly the tire of choice, right?
Absolutely.
Throughout this one, and he was stuck on primary tires, and he kept fading back. In fact, he's lucky he didn't finish further back in the field because Christian Lundgaard saw the sign, hit it, and had a very entertaining
took it around for
drive.
the entire lap.
Yes, for a lap. But look, I'm almost more surprised that Scott Dixon didn't get Will Power before the end of that race to close the gap by even more.
Well, I think Will Power is lucky that he didn't take blacks in that final stint because he was considering it. We heard the radio about he thought the blacks were better. Luckily for Will Power, they went reds. Not so lucky for Joseph Newgarden, they went blacks. And when we look at how this championship is shaping up with Will Power 20-point lead on both Dixon and Newgarden, you could say maybe Newgarden's in closer, he would be in closer striking distance if that tire strategy was different. But we didn't have too many surprises with those top contenders. Not a win, but Power did what he had to do. Dixon did what he had to do. And to a certain extent, Newgarden did as well. He started where he finished where he started in 8th, didn't have a disastrous weekend. So it puts all three of those guys in the thick of the contention heading into Laguna Seca.
And let's not fail to mention that Newgarden had that grid penalty, right? So
that's her, yeah. So he qualified, second and lost the 6 spots to go back to 8th with the unapproved engine change. Yeah. What's about your number 2, sir?
Number 2, how about the start? So they changed the start procedure. And I think we were all shocked because all the talk leading into this race, not will there be a crash, it's who will be involved in the crash in turn 1 at Portland, and could it involve a championship contender? Well, that didn't factor in at all. And
it was a clean, not just a clean start, but a good-looking start as well.
Yeah, they formed up well. The field was not strung out. They got through turn 1. They completed first lap clean and continued on with that. I think that was very surprising. I think it definitely changed the course of this race. And look, because of the lack of that early caution and the lack of a little bit of chaos at the beginning, it turned the first, essentially 3/4 of this race into, I'm trying to think of the right word to use, not a snoozer, but kind of ho-hum. And we did get that late caution with Rinus VeeKay with a bonehead move taking out Jimmy Johnson. That was very bizarre. Did not expect to see that.
I mean, when I first saw it, I immediately texted you, Jimmy Johnson, LOL, and then they showed the replay immediately, and it was not Jimmy's fault.
No, and that's been a trend this year, it seems, that Jimmy Johnson's been collected by other drivers, or when he had the mechanical failure at Nashville when he was running really, really well. Just a bizarre situation for Jimmy and Rinus VeeKay with a surprising move late in this one. And we got some good quality racing. I think the final 25 laps or so after that restart. But I think I was just so surprised we didn't have a caution turn one, lap one at this event, because that is pretty much the standard we have seen at Portland for many years through IndyCar, CART, Champ Car, now IndyCar again. That's just how this race has gone. But surprisingly, everyone got through clean. It did limit kind of the intrigue to this event for the first 3 quarters of the race, but I think the last 3 quarters, it was entertaining. You had some things at play, and you had people moving up and down on that restart with Joseph Newgarden and Christian Lundgaard, Rossi, Herta, etc.
It's amazing what these drivers can accomplish when they work together and all talk about it. And the push obviously for the different start and all that stuff, that definitely helped. But not only was it a clean start, but you didn't have too many cars off going into the chicane, turn one, and all that. It was a very good start, and the precedent has been set now at Portland, so it was good to see. I didn't want carnage, but if there was some added intrigue to the championship over the final 2 races, it was going to happen at Portland.
Yes,
and we didn't have it.
Yeah, we did not have it. And I think we expected it, right? And so to have 25 cars get through cleanly in this event, turn one, lap one, a major, major surprise. And yeah, it kind of strung things out and made tire strategy the most important thing in this race, because fuel saving was never really a factor, which is fine with me. I don't need every race to be a fuel save and them talking in the broadcast about fuel mileage. I think the tire strategy is a lot more entertaining because you can actually see fall off between primaries and the red compound tires. And some tracks you want the primary tire, and some tracks you want the softer red tire. It just depends, and this was a red track.
We should have known that this was going to be a clean race after qualifying, because you had Scott Dixon way back in 16th. You had Romain Grosjean starting beside Scott Dixon in 15th. You have the chaos that is Portland on lap 1. We should have known, with Scott Dixon's luck, that this would be the race that nothing would happen. He would not be caught up in anything towards the back of the field, or Grosjean trying something ridiculous. We should have been able to predict this on Saturday after qualifying, knowing, well, Scott Dixon's not going to get taken out. He's going to emerge unscathed from whatever. And look what happened. No wreck, moved his way up the field, finished on the podium, and in position to potentially win a championship.
And not that Scott Dixon's, ever had bad luck at Portland. I mean, he's literally gone through a cloud of dust and emerged and then on his way to a championship.
Yeah, so it's his blessed place for sure.
What's your second takeaway?
Let's talk about Callum Ilott. A 9th place finish. It's his second top 10 of the season. His first was at the GP in May. We hear now that Juncos is going to expand the operations to a second car next year. And I know we kind of give a hat nod here and there to Juncos and Callum Ilott, but I really don't think we're giving him enough credit. The fact he sits 20th in points, and that's with missing Detroit and not racing, and ahead of Devlin DeFrancesco, ahead of Kyle Kirkwood, ahead of Jack Harvey and Jimmy Johnson for that matter, and Dalton Kellett. And more often than not in the latter half of the season, racing in the top 15. Road America 11th, Toronto 14th, Iowa 12th and 11th, the second GP 14th, Nashville 15th, was 21st at Gateway, then comes back with a 9th at Portland. Been very impressed with Callum Ilott and this entire operation. It has, as a single car team, excelled in the position that it's in. And you could see Callum Ilott cracking the top 15 in points next year, which for a second-year program would be absolutely phenomenal.
And doing this as a one-car team. I mean,
That's the
he's
huge
a
thing.
Rookie that ran, yes, a couple of races last year, but truly doing this on a one-car team. He has no data to really compare things to. They are essentially the shoestring operation. At least that's how it's viewed. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that's how it's viewed in the paddock. And for him to go from 16th, his first oval race, and they were quick in one of those practice sessions at Texas. led a lap there. Yes, he struggled at Indy, but then you mentioned Iowa. I mean, 12th and 11th on a short track. I mean, that's a track where if you're off the pace, you get eaten alive. And for him to have 2 solid results that weekend, I mean, it shows that come next year, top 10 probably in play for an oval race for him. And obviously he's qualified quite well on road and street course events. And, this is a guy who I think with the proper teammate can really take that jump, like you mentioned, top 15 in points. And not just top 15 in points this year. He's 20th in points right now. He's 13 points ahead of Jimmy Johnson. He should be safe at Laguna Seca unless there's some mechanical issue. And with that, leader circle money, right? I mean, that is very important, and so they will put themselves in position for that for next year. So I think that's also very helpful for that team. And you mentioned the second entry. The 78 car will run full-time next year. Few people mentioned. In fact, David Malcher Lopez, motorsport.com, mentioning, as always, they throw these in the last paragraph of the story.
Of course.
Benjamin Peterson, who's already tested with the Juncos Hollinger Racing. He won the lights race at Portland. In fact, dominated. I think he led every practice session, won the pole, won the race for, I believe, his first lights win in his career. And then a possibility that Felix Rosenqvist could join the team if Aaron McLaren SP manages to lever Alex Blow out of Chip Ganassi Racing. And then another name mentioned, Jenna Fryer of the AP, mentioning this, talking with Callum Eilert. Eilert hinted they could be interested in another current Indy Lights driver, Linus Lundqvist, who will be your Lights title winner. Also, Ryan Hunter-Reay, who's been out. He's under a sports car contract with Chip Ganassi Racing, also been mentioned for openings, and he was like a special advisor for Eilert early in the season,
right?
If I recall. And so those are a couple other names to keep in mind as well for Juncos.
I think it will be a fascinating storyline to watch on who gets that seat. So do you bring in another young driver to partner with Eilert? Do you bring in a veteran driver that can mentor him, but also you don't want to stunt the development of Eilert that he's already shown? I mean, the guy has been proficient and commands the respect of veterans in the series despite being a rookie. I think we can talk about some other rookies that maybe don't get the respect from the veterans that Eilert has gotten in his first season. Looking at DeFrancesco, maybe even Kirkwood. But, man, I mean, for what he has done with the resources that team has, punching above their weight in a lot of ways. And growth is good, and growth at Juncos is especially good. And I hope going forward that we don't see Eilert relegated to second status with that series or with that team, depending on who they hire. I would really like them to continue Callum Eilert's rise of him being their driver because he's performed well for him.
And, you look at who would be the best candidate for the seat. I mean, to me, it's Felix Rosenqvist because he's quick, he's got speed, he's been on a top team, but he's still young enough that he has something left in the tank. He's got, up to 10 years probably left in his IndyCar career if he continues to perform at a solid level. I mean, Ryan Hunter-Reay, to me, yes, he's experienced. He's a title winner, Indy 500 winner, and that would help a lot during May. But you're looking at 1, maybe 2 full-time seasons there.
All of a sudden, Felix Rosenqvist is potentially becoming a guy that a lot of people are chasing. Could it be Chip Ganassi Racing?
Yeah, could he go back? Did he burn bridges there, or is the olive branch extended?
Could he be going back? I mean, could he be a candidate at Andretti Autosport?
One would think if Colton Herta leaves, he'd be a candidate.
Now all of a sudden, Juncos has an open seat. So Felix Rosenqvist, if he's not down for Formula E, if that's where he looks to be headed, definitely has some options within the paddock of the IndyCar series.
Well, and I believe the report is that September 30th is when Aaron McLaren SP's option or whatever ends, and Felix is free to talk to other teams after that. And so that's coming up here in, 3 weeks? And I would think we'd have an announcement pretty quick after that just because I think, like you said, he is the hot commodity right now, at least on the IndyCar side, as far as people want his services, assuming he's not back with Aaron McLaren SP next year.
The never-ending moving dominoes that is silly season. All right, number 3 for you, Caleb.
Okay, you know what? I really didn't have a whole lot to take away from the IndyCar race at Portland, but I did actually catch some of the USF 2000 race, and one of the races on Saturday. I think this would have been the final race for the championship. And wow, you talk about chaos at the start. There was chaos at the start. A couple of the favorites, one of them being Miles Rowe, went off course. He had to drive back through the field, and his teammate Jace Denmark, his day was done, basically. I think he was a few laps down. And, we thought Miles Rowe or Jace Denmark would be the champions, and Rowe and Denmark had issues race 1. Issues race 2. Rowe raced his way back through the field over the weekend, but unfortunately it wasn't enough. 6 points separating him as they crowned a new champion over the weekend, and it was very, very exciting stuff. The ladder series, I think they're in good hands. Not that this is a surprise, but this was really good stuff, very entertaining, and to see Miles Rowe race his way through the field, try to get up high enough in the championship. Couldn't quite do it, but congrats to him, and hopefully we see him back in IndyCar, or not in IndyCar, but Indy Pro 2000 with Pabst Racing next year, because clearly he's deserved the move up, and obviously the guy who clinched the championship, Michael D'Orlando, he is the champion. He moves up to Indy Pro 2000. So, and then Jagger Jones, over the weekend, he finished 4th. He's running Indy Lights next year. And I've seen, and Rob Howden, who we had on last week, catch that interview if you missed it. Great stuff on the ladder. But he teased that Jagger Jones was looking on moving up from USF 2000 to Indy Lights, and he has done it. So, really exciting. In fact, a lot of exciting announcements, I think, for the ladder series. Lewis Foster, who's the Indy Pro 2000 champion, will join Andretti for next year. I mentioned Jagger Jones, as he will be joining Cape Motorsports for their lights program as well.
Michael D'Orlando, he's the one that wins the USF 2000 championship, so he will move up with the scholarship to Indy Pro 2000.
And then we know Linus Lundqvist is a lock to win Indy Lights and wrap up that championship. And
so what does that scholarship look like, right?
Yeah, where does he land at IndyCar? Does he go somewhere else? Super Formula is also mentioned as a rumored possibility. But just to me, the ladder series have great health right now, and I think it's just very exciting, that championship going down, and just, again, a 6-point separation.
Well, and we're seeing some elite talent continue to go through the road to Indy, but you hope that the Linus Lundqvist situation, we hope he finds a full-time ride somewhere in IndyCar, but the hope is that this is not the start of a trend. We've seen that in Formula One, the issues where you go through F4, F3, F2, and blocked for whatever reason, whether it's lack of seats, lack of money, whatever. The beauty of the road to Indy was there was always open seats, right? If you did well at every level of the ladder, you were going to get a full season and the next season more often than not, right? But the hope is that the issues for Linus Lundqvist potentially not being in the seat for a full time for 2023 isn't the start of a trend for IndyCar.
Yeah, that would be, I think, be a major disappointment if he's not able to land a seat, and just comes down to Honda only has so many engine leases available, and whether it's 14 or 15 or maybe 16, which seems unlikely that they would go that high. But we'll see what they decide, because Linus Lundqvist has been mentioned, under contract with HMD, and you would assume that's tied into Coyne, and he would take a seat there. If a seat, whether it's a third car or one of the other cars opens up, you'd think he'd be a prime candidate there.
You hope so. We'll see.
All right, what's your next takeaway? What number are we in?
We're on 3, so we're finishing up here. I feel like this is a racing point, but also encompasses the entire season. I thought Portland was very good in terms of the back end of the field, really full of guys that are in similar situations for the entire season. And I'm talking about underperforming. And if you start in last and work your way up, it's very much a who's who of guys that are on the short list of who underperformed this year. So 25th was Connor Daly. We expected more out of Connor Daly this year, correct?
Yes, and he had a few issues. The clutch burned up. They had that fuel fire that we saw on the broadcast that happened after that. So that ended his day early.
And no finish better than 12th since the Indianapolis 500. We talk all about momentum coming out of the Indianapolis 500. Connor Daly did not have it. After the month of May, where he finished 5th and 6th, was never above 12th the rest of the season. Continuing, Jimmie Johnson. Did we expect more out of Jimmie Johnson this year?
Yes.
Okay. 1 top 5 out of 6th. I mean, we see progress, but I think we expected more than 21st in points.
Yeah, he did get his best road and street course finish. What was that, 15th? Was that at Mid-Ohio?
It was 14th at Gateway. I'm looking 16th at Mid-Ohio.
16th. Okay, that was his best then. Top 5 at one of the Iowa races. 11th, the race before that in the doubleheader. The 6th at Texas. I mean, he performed well in the ovals. The exception is the crash at Indy, right? But he qualified well and probably would have qualified higher if not for a major moment in between turns 1 and 2 during his qualifying run. But we saw progress. I think. Look, everyone's probably already just rolling their eyes. Caleb, the Jimmie Johnson homer. I don't feel like I'm a homer. I feel like we're grading him too tough because he comes from a primary oval background. He didn't race in NASCAR when they had a lot more road and street course races. That was not his background. But I think he's coming along. You give him next year, and yes, I think we have a lot higher expectations. We would expect him to not be running at the back all the time with the course of testing and to be a true contender at every single oval race. He was never in the picture at Gateway.
Correct. So we were on Daly 25th, Johnson 24th. You have Simon Pagenaud 23rd. It's been a disappointing season, underperforming season for Simon Pagenaud.
Pagenaud's 14th. Oh, you're talking at Portland. Okay.
At Portland, but he's sitting 14th in the standings. We expected better than 14th out of Simon Pagenaud.
Yes, I think that was a guy who we figured top 12 in points would be right there, and I don't think that's going to happen unless he has a massive race at Laguna Seca to bypass Grosjean, who's only a point ahead of him, and then VK, who's 14 ahead.
Dalton Kellett was next in 22nd. Goes without saying, he's last among full-time drivers in the entire series at 25th. You had Christian Lundgaard, who kind of was the exception towards the back with his issues. But then you had Rinus VK in 20th. He's 12th in points. I think that's somebody that we also expected more out of. Just a single podium in 2022.
Yeah, you expected a race win, right? At least one.
Yeah, I mean, just
in top 10 in points.
It was a regression, no doubt. And, even continue. Romain Grosjean, expected more out of him. He was 19th. Takuma Sato, 18th. We've expected more out of Taku this year. Elio, 17th. So Portland was very much a microcosm of the entire series when you look at the back end of the finishing results. Pockmarked, filled with drivers that underperformed, underdelivered in 2022.
And I just... you some of these teams, they're strong at certain tracks. Others, like the Rahal team, they were terrible until, Toronto? And then that's when their season essentially turned around.
Just needed a trip out of the country to turn things around.
Yeah, that Sebring test just seemed to fix everything because Graham Rahal has largely been a different driver since that Toronto race where he got his first top 5 of the season. He had another top 5 at Portland, led some laps over the weekend, so he's moved up in the standings. Probably not going to catch Felix Rosenqvist, barring a crash and again a massive result from Graham to finish the top 10 in points. But he's on the cusp, and it seemed, his season seemed lost until then.
Yeah,
same with the team.
Sure, he had 5 top 10s since Toronto, so that's 5 over the last 7 races, and through the first 9 races of the season, he only had 4 top 10s. So a good turnaround for Graham Rahal. I just feel, though, that it's one of those teams, one of those drivers that we're like, okay, momentum's picking up towards the end of the year. They'll carry this into the next season, but then it never materializes.
Yeah, and we'll see how that plays out, because I think, obviously, year one with Jack Harvey in the Hy-Vee car, massive disappointment.
I would use the word disastrous.
Yes.
For Jack Harvey.
Outside of, obviously, the unfortunate crash at Texas in practice that took him out of that race. And look, I mean, he gets a handful of points. He'd move up at least one spot in the standings from that if he were able to compete there. But, yeah, 1 top 10, not what we would have expected, no top 5s. I mean, I think we expected a lot more. I'm not saying he was going to be a top 10 in points guy, but you thought top 15 was a lock with that equipment.
You would have thought, but that's one driver that's going to be glad this season comes to an end this weekend.
All right, so that wraps up our 3 things at Portland. Some other notes to get to from over the weekend. We'll get to the TV rating in a second, but Christopher DeHard, per IndyCar, the last time 5 drivers had a mathematical shot at the championship going to the final race was in 2003 when the top 5 were separated by 30 points. Scott McLaughlin, 5th, 41 points behind Will Power. So not as tight. And look, I think we only think the top 3 are the true contenders for the championship on Sunday at Laguna Seca. But still, it is very, very close. Also, this from Nick Yeoman of IndyCar Radio, and he credits Mark Jaynes on the stat. But how wild is it that Team Penske has 2 drivers that have combined for 8 wins this season, but this guy with just 1 win for them this year that is looking really good for the championship?
Yeah.
It's still so weird to me that the championship leader only has 1 win this season.
Isn't it wild?
Like, I mean, and to be fair, Marcus Ericsson was the championship leader before Will Power before that. So the majority of the season since the Indy 500, a driver with only 1 win in the standings has been the points leader, right? Because I don't think Newgarden has led, during any of that stretch. He's had to work his way back up.
Does that signify in your mind a need to value wins more, or are you happy with the current points system?
I'm happy with the current point system because, yes, it rewards consistency, but, I mean, you're getting 10 more points for a race win over second. I mean, that's significant. It's just one of those weird anomalies is how I look at it, because usually guaranteed it takes 3+ wins to win a championship, and if you win 3 or more, you're usually looking really good. And to be fair, Joseph Newgarden, 5 wins, Scott McLaughlin, 3 wins, but they have not been consistent like Will Power and even throwing Scott Dixon and even Marcus Ericsson. They've been more consistent, I think, over the course of the season. They just don't have the race wins.
Yeah, it's all about consistency and maximizing every single position you can make up from 25th up to 1st. And at least through 16 races, Will Power has been able to do that better than Joseph Newgarden and the rest of the field.
Some other notes from over the weekend. Looking at it, how about Kyle Kirkwood? We haven't mentioned him, but he started 13th. He finished 13th, and that's a good result for him after really struggling this year. In fact, his best result of the season going all the way back to a 10th at Long Beach.
I think the bigger thing is stringing together some clean races, some no DNFs. I think it's 3 straight maybe? Nashville, Gateway, and Portland. I think that's as
Nashville,
big of a thing.
he and Malukas tangled up.
Yeah, that's true. Which,
and they were running for
was his fault.
A top 5.
Yeah.
Both of them were top 5 cars.
I'm not going to put that on Kirkwood, at least for that particular move. But, a couple clean races. I mean, that's what he needs to show, right, as he goes to Andretti for next year is, can you stay out of trouble? Can you bring the car home in one piece?
All right, TV rating time.
Okay.
So, bad news, they didn't reach 1 million viewers, at least initially, as the TV number 979,000.
All we needed is 2 more people with Nielsen boxes to turn their TVs on, basically.
That's really what it feels like. But when you add in the total audience delivery, you got just slightly over that 1 million mark. So looking at the final numbers from Portland, and of course NBC sent out the stat, and most watched season since 2008, which they've sent several times. So total audience delivery, 1.011 million viewers, up 49% versus last year's Portland race, which was also on NBC, up 6% versus NBC's 2021 race average, excluding the Indy 500. The season, again, still the most watched through 15 races since 2008. Total audience delivery this year of 1.357 million viewers. In 2008, 1.738 million viewers. That was across ABC, ESPN, ESPN2. So you have the first season after reunification, and you had a great TV deal then at the time, ABC, ESPN, ESPN2, where you had the bulk of the races on ABC and I think ESPN2. And then this year, next best as far as TV numbers go. Not that this should be surprising, but you have 14 network races, a Peacock race, and then 2 on USA. And USA is a bigger audience than what NBC Sports had, the former cable channel that they had a lot of races on. And then before that, obviously, it was known as Versus. But you get a better TV deal, you get better numbers. That should not be a surprise. Now, the one caveat I would throw into the Portland number, because, again, they got up over that million when you include streaming numbers. Last year, Portland was a week later. It was not Labor Day weekend, so they were competing against the NFL, and I think quite simply that's the reason why this number is way up compared to last year, because last year I think it was 666,000 viewers.
That's about what I expect
NBC
for Laguna Seca. I don't think it is even close to 1 million this weekend.
Yeah, I don't think so either, because it's in that late NFL window, essentially, because the race coverage starts at 3, green flag around 3:30, and you're just not going to get the eyeballs on it. Now, the good news is the Colts play at 1 o'clock Eastern, and so the Indianapolis market, the Colts game should be wrapped up right around or not long after the IndyCar race starts, so you could at least get that crowd to switch over.
You could, in theory, but a lot of people that are excited about the NFL starting, and it's a hell of a lot of people in this country, aren't even going to entertain watching a auto race on Sunday. They're going from the early games to the late games to the Sunday night game, just football all day.
That is how it goes here in the U.S. To our international listeners, American football is literally everything in the sports world here.
Everybody just gets out the way. I know there's some people out there that still want this season to go longer, but here in the States, once football starts, especially the NFL, it's better just to get out of the way.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and the comparison in TV numbers paints that picture perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. So prepare yourself, early next week coming out of Laguna Seca weekend for that TV rating, because I don't think it's going to be very good.
All right, so that wraps up Portland, and we have quite a bit, I would say, silly season, not rumors, but actual news to get to this week. We start off, again, we mentioned Juncos. They're going to run that 78 car full-time next year. We got into the drivers who are possibilities there. Pareto Autosport, they will be racing at Laguna Seca with Simona Di Silvestro, and they are planning to do more races next year in IndyCar in 2023. They'd like to do more than 4. Beth Pareto telling Marshall Pruitt of Racer.com. They're not sure if they'll do a full season next year, but they're hoping for at least more than 4 races. Look, a lot of people kind of expect this to be paired with Ed Carpenter Racing, and Beth Pareto says, talking to Ed, we'd be happy to stay with ECR. Obviously, Pareto is going to be a Chevy team. I think that's another thing to factor into it, but they're looking at adding more employees, particularly women, to the team. And we'll see how it goes, but hopefully more than 4 races. Look, this is expanded 1 race beyond what they initially announced this year, so that's a positive, and we'll keep moving forward and see what happens.
I could see maybe a 6-race program for Pareto next year, maybe 6 races plus the 500 potentially. I think that's good natural growth that doesn't speed things up too quickly, and will be great to have them. I really love seeing Simona out there competing. They've made tremendous strides this year on track. I expect that to continue next year.
So that's one of those things to keep in mind. Indy Lights side, This is wild to me. We've been joking throughout the season about
This is
HMD
crazy.
Motorsports and how many cars. Well, they've finally done it. Marshall Pruitt, Racer.com, reporting HMD expanding to not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7, but 8.
8
Indy
cars,
Lights
8 entries into Indy Lights. These are full, I mean, right, as of what we
Yes.
understand right now, full-time entries. That's
Yes.
wild. So when we're talking about getting to, let's say, 15 full-time drive cars in Indy Lights, you're already over halfway there just with HMD.
And then you throw in Andretti. They usually run 4. I don't think that'd be a surprise. You have some expanding teams like Cape Motorsports, for example. Juncos usually has a couple of cars. I mean, already 15 seems like a given. And look, I get that we tell this story every offseason. Oh, they're going to get to 15. Oh, it could be 17 or 18. Oh, it could be 20. I think this year that pie in the sky number is 20 now. But 15 should be the bare minimum. When you look at the grid, you just hope you get more than 15 because otherwise half the field is HMD.
You know what's interesting is it is definitely a pivotal offseason for Andretti Autosport, not just in IndyCar. So we obviously know the storylines in IndyCar with Rossi moving over to McLaren, and now you have potentially Colton Herta, his last race, maybe, for the foreseeable future in IndyCar coming up in Laguna Seca. But now you look at Indy Lights, and for a while it's been Andretti Autosport, right, dominating the series. You know, it's been that pinnacle team since Schmidt-Peterson left Indy Lights. But Linus Lundqvist wins the championship with HMD. The next 3 drivers were Andretti Autosport drivers in the standings, but all of them were over 100 points behind Linus Lundqvist. And now with the number of entries that HMD is preparing for 2023, you could say the dominant team in Indy Lights is now HMD. And so don't overlook the road to Indy in terms of Andretti Autosport and some decisions it needs to make, because it's been surpassed in Indy Lights and it continues to be marginalized in IndyCar. So really, really pivotal offseason for Andretti Autosport all around, both Indy Lights and in IndyCar.
Plus, some of the teams that were at some of the earlier rounds, like TJ Speed, they say they expect to be back next year with some drivers. Curious to see what Force Indy does. I mean, Ernie Francis Jr. needs another year. Will they give him that opportunity? Cape Motorsports, as I mentioned, expanding. They'll have Jagger Jones in one of their cars. So there's just a lot more competition for Andretti. Juncos out of it. Could they return to Lights? We'll see. But those are some of the teams to keep in mind for Lights in 2023. In fact, sticking with Lights, Nolan Siegel. Talking about HMD, well, he'll compete and make his debut coming up this weekend with HMD Motorsports. So another name to keep in mind, probably for next year as well. It would be an opportunity for that driver to be in one of those HMD seats. So that's the news on Lights, and I think not that this is a surprise, but it's good they announced it before the end of the season. Scott McLaughlin gets a multi-year contract extension with Team Penske. Obviously very well deserved.
Absolutely. Turned out to be a very worthy move for Scott McLaughlin from Australia to the States. It's turned out this year for race wins, I imagine the expectation is next year is to compete for the championship.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt with that. This from Jaron Dimmendahl, who covers kind of the junior series in the U.S. and in Europe. So apropos those little birds that whisper things in my ear, like Chadwick testing in Indy Lights. Again, another person to keep on the radar for next year with Andretti Autosport.
Yeah.
Rob Howden, we talked to him last week. Check that interview out. Cannot stress enough, but he basically made it sound like, yeah, she's going to be in Lights next year. But Jaron Dimmendahl says there's a persistent story that Felipe Drugovich rejected a multi-year deal in IndyCar with Chip Ganassi Racing, and says, if true, why would he do that unless he has an F1 deal lined up? Yeah, that is very curious if that rumor is true.
Well, I mean, I think he has made it clear that he is going to exhaust all options for Formula One before he entertains other racing series. So even if it's hey, you need to come back to F2 again, even though you potentially win the championship, it sounds like he's a guy that would do that on top of instead of doing IndyCar. So maybe to buy time in a team in Formula One is prepared to make him a reserve driver or something. That's really kind of, their last option once you've kind of dominated F2 and don't have an open seat is let's make him a reserve driver. I can see that happening, but it doesn't sound like a guy that is really eager to come to IndyCar. So I just don't see that being an option, at least for 2023.
No, not in the near term. I mean, it was, again, when you talk with these guys, you read the quotes, IndyCar was clearly the fallback option, and I think he would rather have a reserve driver role in F1 than be an IndyCar driver. And,
and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
Look, they're getting paid well, I'm sure.
He may come around. Who knows? But, when your dream is to make the apex of motorsport in the world, you're not just going to end that dream without trying your damnedest to make it happen. And he's not ready to call it quits.
So that's one of the other names, I guess, to keep on the back burner as far as IndyCar in the future and to keep in mind in upcoming years. Because, again, this is a 2023 thing at all, but just something to keep in mind because, like we've seen with Callum Ilott, Christian Lundgaard, other people coming over from F2, I mean, these are people we have to keep in mind for these seats. And one other person who I would assume is coming back over, Oliver Askew, he is out at Andretti's Formula E team. Obviously someone to keep in mind for IndyCar seats or a sports car ride as well.
I just see him as a sports car driver at this point. I think he's exhausted the opportunities in open wheel racing, still only 25 years old. But when you look at his Formula E performance this year, which was his lone season with the Andretti Formula E team, 16th in points, no podiums. He had a 4th in London and a 5th in South Korea. And other than that, it was pretty dismal for Oliver Askew. So unfortunately for a guy that showed such promise, right? Winning the championship in F2000, winning the championship in Indy Lights in 2019, it just hasn't worked out for him since. But hopefully he can land on his feet in sports cars.
And since that crash, at Indy, right? The Indy 500, that crashed late in 2020. I mean,
yeah.
You had the concussion and then this management team and all that drama. Look, it just seems like drama does follow Arrow McLaren SP with these drivers.
Who would have thought?
But starting with James Hinchcliffe. But it's unfortunate that played out the way it did. His results clearly suffered. He clearly did not seem to be 100% and had to do what he had to do. Formula E ride. Look, Formula E, I think people think, oh, it's a joke of a series, but it's like I've watched races here or there. I mean, one, it is incredibly tough to pass.
Okay. The
drivers who excel, I think, largely have had a Formula One background, and I think it's a very competitive series. The circuits are tough. They're all street circuits. I just think it's hard for drivers to step in and do well over there who don't have, I guess, the Formula One background. For whatever reason, that those seem to be the guys who do quite well in Formula E.
Well, and it's tough when your teammate Jake Dennis finishes 6th in the championship and you finish 16th. So it's not like Andretti's team was a back marker with both of its drivers. Jake Dennis was competing, got a win in London, and Oliver Askew just wasn't able to keep up.
Yeah, and Askew had some good results, I think, his first race weekend of the season, but yeah, he struggled after that. Okay, time to preview Laguna Seca, the final race of the IndyCar season. Firestone Grand Prix of Monterey, the official name. Looking at the weekend schedule for you over the weekend. Obviously, all sessions on Peacock, but practice 1 on Friday, 5:30 to 6:45 p.m. Eastern. Peacock, IndyCar Live, SiriusXM, IndyCar Radio. All these platforms listed. Then practice 2, 1:15 to 2:15 Eastern, Saturday afternoon. Qualifying 5:05 to 6:20 Eastern on Saturday. There will be a warm-up from noon to 12:30 on Sunday. And that's, again, all times Eastern. And then the race coverage. So this says 2:40 to 6 o'clock. However, obviously coverage doesn't start until 3 o'clock on NBC. And then as far as the race, approximate 3:30 green flag over the weekend on Sunday with coverage on NBC until 6 o'clock. Also, this will be on Universo as well, the race. So just another outlet for people. But let's get into our picks. I think it's easy to pick one of the drivers to win. I'm not going to do that because I think it's too easy. Feel free if that's where you want to go.
So you're going to make me take Colton Herta?
Yeah.
I'll take Colton Herta.
You will take Colton Herta? Man, this is a track where qualifying is literally everything.
I just feel with the title on the line and 2 Penske drivers in contention that Penske is going to make sure it is locked in for qualifying. Not that they wouldn't otherwise, just saying.
I'm going to go with Will Power.
Really? You think he's going to put an exclamation point in the season, win a race, become a multi-season champion?
Yes. I'm going with Will Power to win and win the championship. Look, there are tons of championship scenarios, but I think the key one to know, if Power finishes 3rd or higher, even with no bonus points, he clinches the championship no matter what. So outside of that, basically, Power has 4th place, pole leads a lap, or 5th place, pole leads a lap, most laps led. Newgarden finishes 1st or worse. Dixon finishes 1st or worse. Power still wins. I mean, look, it's set up essentially Power finishes top 3, he wins the championship. I think that's the key scenario
that's the
you
big
need
one,
to know. Nathan Brown of the Indy Star has an article with all the different championship scenarios, and there are tons of them. But that is the key thing to know for this weekend. And a race that, look, it's tough to pass at Laguna Seca. Colton Herta has dominated the last 2 times IndyCars raced there because, again, they didn't race there in 2020. But he's clearly, I would say, the favorite going into the weekend. And I think we both said this. We could very well see this being Herta's last IndyCar race for this time being, this weekend. This could be it for now.
That was the biggest prediction for me. Not who's going to win this race, not who wins the championship, but is this the final IndyCar race for Colton Herta for the immediate future? As of right now, what would you say?
Yes.
I agree.
There's too much talk about it. In fact, I want to get into that real quick before we move on to news and notes and other features, but there's too much there with this in Colton Herta because it benefits too many people, right? I mean, this is one of those things where it's in F1's best interest, AlphaTauri, if they lose Pierre Gasly, or even if not, quite honestly, because Yuki Tsunoda's really struggled. He's young. He's brash.
He's American.
He's American.
I mean,
he's talented.
Yeah.
There's so much on the line. And to me, it makes sense because if AlphaTauri doesn't snap him up, McLaren could snap him up. I mean, he's going to go somewhere to an IndyCar team. And in fact, Chris Medland F1 on Twitter, who covers Formula One for Racer, Helmut Marko just told me, this was again last weekend at Zandvoort, but Helmut Marko just told me an agreement has already been reached with all parties for Colton Herta to join if he's granted a super license by the FIA. He expects a decision by Monza. So we could literally know our answer this weekend.
Any moment. You could be listening to this podcast and we already have an answer for
yes.
this.
And then Virtual Statman on Twitter, Colton Herta has competed in 63 IndyCar races and won 7 of them. Max Verstappen had competed in fewer car races than that in his entire life. in any formula before being granted an F1 super license. You got to remember this. It's easy to forget. The whole super license things goes back to Max Verstappen getting one.
He didn't have enough
at just 17 as far as getting an F1 seat and all the hubbub over that, and he turned out into being a megastar. We knew he was talented. Obviously runs in his background. His dad was an F1 driver, but Verstappen, I think, has exceeded any expectations. You go back to 2016 when he came to F1, got a race win within Toro Rosso, moved up to the Red Bull team and has been the primary guy for several years now with the championship, and obviously going to pick up another one this year, barring some bizarre thing that limits his competition the rest of the season. But the super license thing, I mean, we could talk about that extensively, but to just put in perspective how dumb it is, Steve Wittick, who covers the ladder series in IndyCar as well, presumptive Indy Lights champ Linus Lundqvist, has enough points for his super license via Formula Regional USA and Indy Lights. It's not a dig against him. It's proof the FIA super license system undervalues IndyCar. My 2 cents. 3 to 5 point bonus per IndyCar win added to regular points. And then we've also seen this out there over the week as well. But, if you take away Herta's oval results, he would meet the qualifications.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's very weird.
It's so weird. Motorsport.com had an article posted on Thursday afternoon quoting F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali, and he says, quote, "It is clear that an American driver can create a lot of interest in a rapidly growing market such as the U.S. at the moment," talking about Colton Herta. "Today, however, entry to Formula One is linked to clear parameters contained in the sporting regulations, and these parameters that determine the possibility of obtaining a super license must be respected. The credibility of the system is at stake. The FIA is doing its assessments, and it is a matter for them." Interesting comments considering Max Verstappen got an exemption.
Yes, exactly.
So this is not a first-time thing. I don't know why the credibility of the super license system is being called into question now when it's been waived in the past.
Yeah, I think that's the problem I think we all have with it, right? I mean, it's just the double standard at play.
Domenicali mentions about, concerns that some teams could bend the rules to allow Herta in would set a bad precedent and could lessen the attraction of the traditional ladder of Formula 3 and Formula 2. I think that has completely different reasoning on why more drivers are going away from F3 and F2, other than the fact that the super license points don't really matter if they do waive this. So, look, long story short, this rule was put in so ride buyers, so to speak, couldn't come in and do this. And
yet we had...
Well, with no experience is what I'm saying. Within reason, right?
But we've had plenty of people in Formula One over the years who had basically no business being.
Absolutely. I just feel like, of all the issues in Formula One that need addressed, this is the one you're going to fight? If you're Stefano Domenicali, I don't understand. But we'll see. I think we're both of the opinion that an exemption gets granted for Colton Herta, and we're seeing him for the final time, perhaps ever, but at least for a while, in IndyCar on Sunday.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. And before we get to some other things on the docket, real quick, a couple things to throw out about Laguna Seca. First off, IndyCar Weatherman on Twitter. So this is as of the other day, so this could change, but Hurricane K, which is formed
I've seen
in the
that. It's
Pacific.
dumping a lot of rain on California.
So this could play into the race. It depends on the timing. As of the other day, wouldn't factor in, but it could. 3 key stats via Chad 200. 20 of 24 races won from the front row, so that's very important. Only 3 drivers finished inside top 10 in both of the last 2 races here. Herta's won the last 2 races here from pole position, leading 174 of 185 laps. And congrats to Chad, by the way, as he welcomed a daughter into the world a few days ago. So congrats to him as well. But those are some stats to keep in mind for this weekend. All right, if you want more of the podcast, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can find us at newtrackrecordpodcast.com. While you're there, Sign up for the email list so you never miss an episode. Also, check out the store. We have t-shirts and stickers for sale for you. Also, you can become a patron via Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. Thanks to Rob, Xavier, others who are supporting us. Supporter tiers starting with as little as $1 a month. On social media, our Twitter handle is IndyCar Podcast. On Facebook, like us. Just search for New Track Record. And on Instagram, IndyCar Podcast as well. You can email us, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. And as always, you can follow us for free on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts, all for free. Justin, mailbag time, and we start with Rate the Race because, well, that's just an apt starting point. How would you rate the Grand Prix of Portland?
5.5.
Hey, that's what I'm going to go with as well.
Really? I thought it was going to be lower.
No.
Okay.
5.5. Responses here. Jeremy from HBG, solid 7.5 to 8. Mostly clean race, with the last 20 laps being highly entertaining. Vicky Lane 26, a 10 for everyone making it through turn 1, but really an 8. Love that Scotty Mack dominated because it is awesome watching him drive. He's that comfortable. There's pretty good action going on behind him. Plus, had my best fantasy league weekend all season. Yeah, that's going down for us, I think, to the final race. A couple of contenders in that. I haven't looked at the standings, but I know it is fairly close.
Yeah, I had them up. It is Get Larson in the 500 right now is the leader, and 75 points behind is Micah's Motors. I feel like those two are the two top contenders, but Larson in the 500, a bigger gap, more comfortable heading into the weekend than even Mr. Will Power.
Micah's Motors was last year's champion, so he's up there. We'll see if he can come away with the massive weekend this weekend and pull off the upset. Daniel SEM 2004, overall a 5.5. No lap 1 chaos, makes for a boring start. No one could catch the 3. Power was happy to run second. That was it. Dixon's charge through the field was impressive. Hunter's Way 67, who will be at Laguna Seca this weekend. Give it a 7. Scotty Mack was not going to be denied. However, there's some action behind him. Newgarden going backwards at the end was sweet. Transocean Trojan, pretty decent action. Never that interesting for me when one driver gets out in front and dominates. 6.5. Thanks to Pato making a charge and then the late restart. I am Analog. As a Scott McLaughlin fan, I give it a 9. Really impressive when he's on. His pit seems like they're just machines. The overall race is probably a 5. Not super entertaining after you got past the top 6, 7. Only slightly interesting bit was VK taking out JJ. Howard 2112 gave it an 8. Poet Shevchenko, I think I'd give it a 7. Or at least 3 places drivers show they can make passes, and the daring drivers can make up quite a lot of places. This is a masterclass performance by McLaughlin. I could see him challenging for a title easily next season. NK Harden gave it a 7. Box score doesn't tell the story of this one. Only one caution, a guy that led 95% of the laps won, but had a lot of action. Planned Spades with the number 3 instead of the letter E on Twitter. 6 for the race. 'Twas mid. 1 for Power being in good shape for the championship. Overall, 4.5 out of 10. So
Man.
Will Power hater.
He still has those out there.
Yes. After all this time, we still have Will Power haters. And full disclosure, I think I probably used to be one of them, but I've come around. So if I can come around, anyone can come around.
Yes.
That's how I look at it. But that is a look at the Rate the Race ratings from everyone. Jamin T14, actually a couple more. 7, enjoyable race. Speed of the passing zone coming off the backstretch makes it exciting nearly every lap. Daguerre, entertainment is what I'm looking for. This race is pretty boring. 4 out of 10. The Glenn Bird gave it a 6. So overall, I mean, I think people pretty much in agreement, in that 5 to 7 range for this one. I also am curious, the people who came to IndyCar after watching F1, who are newer IndyCar fans, if they view these races different, because I bet they do.
There's a lot more action for them than Formula One races, even though it may not be an exciting IndyCar race for those that have watched longer.
All right, potential driver lineup for Juncos Racing. Some responses here. Nick J. Fletcher, I wish it was Ryan Hunter-Reay, but probably Ed Jones. P. Gaino 14, I just want Santucci somewhere. It would be fine if this is where it is. Yeah, he raced for them. Maybe he's another name we should throw out there for sure. I would think he will fall in somewhere, right?
Right.
This from According to Stitch. So you joked about Portland State. They do have a football team.
I knew it. See?
According to Stitch says, Portland State does have football, but they played last night. So this is from last week's episode. So they would have played, Wednesday night? Because we record on Thursdays. So I'm curious, are you looking up who
I'm
they
looking
played?
up Portland State. They are the Vikings.
Yes.
Portland State Vikings football. They fell. This was last Thursday night in a barn burner. They're in the Big Sky Conference, the FCS.
Yes.
Big Sky. Lost a big one, tough on the road to San Jose State, 21-17. They'll be back in action this Saturday. Pac-12 country. They play Washington.
Ooh. And
Right.
Michael Penix Jr. and Kalen DeBoer, the former IU offensive coordinator and IU quarterback. I'm sure the Huskies will have no problem with Portland State.
You would think, but who knows? They play in Hillsborough Stadium, Portland State, capacity 7,600.
Very small. So that's the same stadium that a minor league baseball team plays in.
Really?
Yes, Hillsborough Hops.
Huh.
I'm aware of that.
You would be.
This from Plain Spades. This is a good question. So, assuming the NASCAR announcement is the All-Star race at North Wilkesboro, we'll know by morning, so we actually found that out this morning. It's being dubbed as NASCAR's Field of Dreams. What would IndyCar's Field of Dreams track be? And someone responded, Royalty Kicks RGV Nazareth, but it's unsavable condition now. That's a good one. What would you say the track would be?
Field of Dreams. Is it not currently on the schedule? So
Yeah,
the track
so-
of dreams,
Yes.
so to speak,
That still exists.
still exists.
Because otherwise, what would it be? Like Trenton or,
Langhorne,
Langhorne?
Ontario.
Yeah, Ontario, exactly.
I'm going to go, and I know you're going to scoff at me. I'm going to go Michigan.
I'm not going to scoff because I would say Milwaukee.
I was thinking Milwaukee, but in Michigan, I'm picturing it in the cornfields coming out of nowhere. It's in the middle of nowhere.
It truly
in
is.
Brooklyn, Michigan. And so that's where I'm going. That would be my track of dreams for IndyCar.
And we joke all the time about Michigan and Milwaukee, throwing Fontana, Cleveland. But, like, for real, I think Michigan and Milwaukee, I mean, those are true IndyCar tracks, and it's a shame they do not race at either of those two, and plus Fontana, obviously, in Cleveland. I mean, they're all entertaining tracks, and I would say very missed on the schedule that they're not a part of it. That wraps up the mailbag news and notes time. Not a lot to get to. We'll rifle through this pretty quickly, but Chris Blair, who is the promoter for the racetrack formerly known as Gateway, they're going to do a throwback weekend in 2023. Salute to the 80s for the Bommarito Automotive Group 500, classic race cars from Indy Registry, tribute bands, 80s legends, Corvette and Camaro car show, classic t-shirts, and more. Stay tuned. It'd be cool if we could get the liveries,
Yeah, I
as a
was
throwback
absolutely
as well.
going to say that, yeah.
Adam Stern, Sports Business Journal, reports Bridgestone has started selling to the general public a new all-season high-performance Firestone tire for road cars as a tread design based off of IndyCar's Rain tire.
Nice.
So that is interesting. And you're going to fill us in with more details on this, but Indy 44 tweeting out Motorsport Games announces transformative 2022 restructuring program, financing commitment, and plans for reverse stock split. None of those things are good, right?
It's so difficult because they spin it like it's better, but basically this is what you need to take out of it. It was able to get $3 million cash advance, basically, from its majority stockholder. That's the financing commitment. So
Okay.
how Motorsports Games is spinning it is, hey, here's an investment in our content from our stockholder. The plans for reverse stock split, apparently they're out of compliance with NASDAQ. To continue to be on the NASDAQ listing, they need to regain compliance, and part of that goes with reverse stock split. What that means, I have no clue. All I'm doing is reading off a press release. But I guess the most important thing is nowhere in this huge press release with a lot of big words that I don't understand does it say that any games are being canceled or delayed, and it still mentions IndyCar as one of its relationships in which it has. So if I do a quick search in this document, I can tell you that, quote, it says let's say, blah, 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 we're proud of the recent progress Motorsports Games team has been making, blah, 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 especially on the game development side. And it says, to all motorsport series that are partners of Motorsport Games, this offers a unique marketing advantage. Also, our recent global fan surveys with Formula One, IndyCar, and MotoGP show the significant crossover of young gamers with motorsport fans. And then also on their website, it also mentions at the title page, welcome to Motorsport Games, official partners, NASCAR, the British Touring Car Championship, Le Mans, WEC, and IndyCar. So, as of right now, full speed ahead for this IndyCar game coming out in May of 2023, but who knows for sure.
Hopefully it still happens. I mean, they've had stuff at racetracks where you could check out like a display. They had it for the Indy 500, the Indy GP. They had it in Nashville.
But no Twitter content, no Twitter posts since May 31st. You would hope that ramps up in the off season.
Absolutely. So it's something to keep an eye on. But man, you get that video game announcement, it's this huge breakthrough thing, and then if it does not go through, obviously I think we're all going to be sorely disappointed. And if that's the worst news of the offseason, I guess we'll take it, right?
Right?
Because it could be so much worse.
And for me, who just got Formula One 2021, so a year behind, I'm clamoring for the IndyCar game, and I know it's a different entity that makes them, but yeah, it's so entertaining with the Formula One game and everything you can do. And if it's just a half of what the F1 games are, it'll be an absolute treat.
All right, so that's the update on the IndyCar game. Nathan Brown of the Indy Star reporting Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing announces it has hired Stefano Sordo, who spent the last 6 years with McLaren F1 as their director of vehicle performance. He'll be Rahal's new IndyCar technical director starting October 1st. Also spent time with Red Bull F1 as well. So that's pretty big get for Rahal from the other side of the pond.
It looks familiar, too. I don't know if he was ever on Drive to Survive, even just being seen in the periphery, but just looks familiar for whatever reason.
And then Trackside Online with IndyCar points scored since the Indy 500. Scott Dixon, 337. Newgarden, 329. Power, 321. Scott McLaughlin, 320.
How about that?
And then this from 500 Indy 1911. You can check these out, but he has, if IndyCar had a manufacturer's championship like F1, it'd be like a team championship. Also, he has, what would the current IndyCar standings be if they use the F1 scoring system? And this includes 1 point for fastest lap bonus, only 25 full-timers listed, sorted to the F1 standings. Will Power would be in the lead by 12 points over Scott McLaughlin, who'd be in second. Then Joseph Newgarden third, 169 points. Scott Dixon fourth, 155. Pato O'Ward fifth, 131. So that does change the point standings quite a bit. Scott McLaughlin moving way up, and Marcus Ericsson, Scott Dixon moving down multiple spots.
Very interesting, but I like it the way it is.
Yeah, I have no problem with the system. It is, I view it as just a weird anomaly that Power's only won one race and is the championship leader. All right, time for Tweets of the Week. Both of these from Joey Barnes, 85 of TobyChristie.com, covering IndyCar and motorsports. First one, last year I used Roman as my breaking point into turn one. I'm not doing that again. Callum Ilott with my favorite quote so far this season. That was good. And then he tweeted during the race, Port Bland. Yeah, it was not the most exciting race, but the championship still very much in play. And at Laguna Seca, where it's very tough to pass, qualifying could be more the championship than the actual race itself. We shall see.
The more exciting day could be Saturday, is what you're saying.
Yes. All right, Justin, time for our random split air driver of the week.
All right, so we're going back to 2002 in the Indy Racing League. And a familiar name, but maybe not for IRL. Johnny Herbert.
Yes.
Yes. Did you know that he tried to qualify for the Indianapolis
Yes.
500? I did not know that.
I have seen there's like a YouTube video of his failed qualifying attempt, right? Because he didn't qualify.
He did not qualify. It was 2002 in the Duesenberg Brothers Racing Series, which, reminds me of Auburn Cord Duesenberg, which
Yes.
we are up in this area.
Auburn, Indiana. Check
Yep.
it out if you have the chance to ever go there. Very, very cool.
Yeah, very cool classic cars there, but was a predecessor of Beck Motorsports, which eventually became, I think it was partnered with Curb Agajanian at some point,
You
potentially.
said 2002. Oh, you know what? I'm on the wrong season.
But it was eventually Beck Motorsports. It partnered with Curb Agajanian, and that was in 2001 and 2002. Came back with Curb Agajanian. But anyway, we're talking what Johnny Herbert did, and you mentioned it. His qualifying effort is on the YouTube machine,
Yes.
but did not qualify. But if you don't know who Johnny Herbert is, over 160 starts in Formula One, 3 victories. He also raced Le Mans. I think he won it.
Yeah, he
at
won
one
Le Mans
point.
in 1991.
He was 4th in the 1995 World Drivers' Championship. He's on Sky Sports, current TV announcer for Sky Sports F1, and I did not realize that he made a run at qualifying for the Indianapolis 500 way back in 2002. It was his one and only attempt at qualifying for an IRL IndyCar kart champ car race.
3 wins, 7 podiums in Formula One across 1989 to 2000. So he had a long F1 career with a handful of teams. Benetton, Michael Schumacher was on that team to start out. Tyrrell, Lotus, Ligier, Sauber, Stewart, Jaguar.
I think over a 10-year period, he raced for 10 different teams, it feels like,
Yeah.
in Formula One. But yeah, a very distinguished career in Formula One, and now a broadcaster, 58 years old, originally from Brentwood, Essex in England. But I never knew that he came over across the pond in 2002 to try to qualify for the Indianapolis 500 with Duesenberg Brothers Racing. Did not qualify that year, 2002. Looking how many, we actually had a handful of drivers not qualify. Let's go through this race really quick. Robbie McGee,
Yeah.
Oriol Servia, John Erb,
Yep.
Johnny Herbert,
Yeah.
and he was actually replaced by Mimo Gidley that year.
Okay.
Jean DeVry, familiar name. Is that Nick's dad?
That's a good question. I didn't think about that.
I don't know either.
I
I don't
found
think it
this that he teamed up with Peter Cox and Tomas Inga to a 9th
Ooh.
place overall finish, 4th in GT1 class in the 2007 24 Hours of Le Mans
Thomas Inga is a great.
factory Aston Martin team. So there's another great random split air driver like Tomas Inga.
Yeah.
But I can tell I'm already in NFL mode because I said Jaguars instead of
Jaguar.
referring to the racing team.
Yep.
Anyway, any other drivers who were out of it?
Still going in there. Scott Harrington waved off. Billy Rowe was bumped. Anthony Lazzaro is former split air driver of the week. And Jimmy Kite.
Yes, I have Jimmy Kite's autograph.
Yeah, he stalled during his qualifying attempt, Jimmy Kite did that year. So in the 99 of that year, Anthony Lazzaro was replaced by Jimmy Kite. Kite was then replaced by Mark Dismore.
A lot of names. In fact, Jimmy Kite had the Royal Purple machine one of the years. That's the autograph hero card I remember getting as a kid.
How about that? So interesting, deep dive there into Johnny Herbert, which I, again, never realized he attempted to make the Indianapolis 500, was eventually replaced by Mimo Gidley, who then withdrew from qualifying. So that is this week's random split era driver of the week, Mr. Johnny Herbert.
All right. Next week, we'll be back to wrap up the IndyCar season. We'll have a new champion crowned, and perhaps it could be a race winner who is crowned the champion, or it could be someone else. We shall see, but We'll have the Firestone Grand Prix of Monterey recap next week and recap the IndyCar Championship. Then it'll be the off season. Hard to believe. But that's where we're at. And then, of course, we'll get all the silly season stuff, and we'll keep you up to speed on all that during the off season. For Justin Kinney, I am Caleb Hatch. Thanks for joining us on another edition of New Track Record Podcast.
A veteran charity is hosting a new track series to reduce veteran suicide. The format is track cross, like a time trial or time attack, but with just one car running at a time. Drivers compete individually and as teams. The event is at Summit Point Raceway on October 22nd. Registration is on motorsportreg.com. Search for Top Dog Track Cross.
Podcasts by Federated Media.